Shalom. This is Ron Warren with the Nuggets of the Torah. This week's teaching is the 12th Parsha and it's called 𝐷𝐢𝐭𝐡, and he lived. From the Torah, ancient Jewish sages understood that the Messiah would appear in the 4th millennium as the suffering servant of God. Some Torah scholars before the time of Yeshua taught that he would appear as the suffering servant in the likeness of Joseph, the son of Jacob. From Joseph's life experiences, the rabbis drew conclusions that the Messiah that was to come would suffer like Joseph in innocence. A core belief became that Joseph's life was to be a historical pattern by which people could recognize the real Messiah when he comes. This gave rise to a calling of an expected Messiah, Mashiach ben Joseph, or better known in English as the Messiah, son of Joseph. Joseph, the son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, the great-grandson of Abraham, was the 4th generation from Abraham. This forces us to answer 3 questions. Number 1, why is this significant? Okay. Number 2, why and how did the Torah scholars see the Messiah as forecast in Joseph, the son of Jacob? And number 3, what bore heavily on this conclusion that the Messiah to come must have the features that are common and parallel to the story of Joseph's life? The answer lies in the numbers association of 4 to the Messiah as found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. The 4th word, et, consists of 2 Hebrew letters, the Aleph and the Tav. It is the first and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now you apply these same words to the Greek language, and we would know it as the Alpha and the Omega. In English, it's also known as the beginning and the end, and the author and the finisher. It became apparent among the Torah scholars that to be a reference to the hidden person to be revealed at the right time, and that person was the Messiah of Israel. There's another connection. The 4th day of creation gave evidence that he would be a great light who would call forth, as the Apostle Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, call forth a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Now, when Abraham was called by God out of the land of darkness to the promised land and gave to him and his descendants the 4th generation after Abraham, it is the very significant generation. The 2nd generation was that of Isaac and Ishmael. The 3rd generation was that of Jacob and Esau. The 4th generation was that of the 12 sons of Jacob and the 5 sons of Esau. People would expect a Messianic figure to be among the 12 sons of Jacob, of whom God renewed the covenant with Abraham on the land. Now, which son would be this Messianic figure? The answer lies in the one who bore the sin of Abraham. The Torah taught that the sins of the father are visited upon the children up to the 4th generation. And this does not mean that every child is going to bear the sins of his great-grandfather. But in Abraham's case, Joseph bore his sins. Now, how do we know that's true? It's in the pattern. Abraham sinned against God when he disobeyed the Lord by trying to take God's promises of a son into his own hands. At his wife Sarah's request, and according to an ancient custom, when a wife is barren, he took Hagar, an Egyptian servant of his wife Sarah, as his concubine, for her to bear a son for him. And she did. She bore a son that Abraham named Ishmael. Now, when Ishmael was a teenager, because of the household tensions that existed between Sarah and Hagar, Abraham drove Hagar and his son into the desert where, under normal conditions, they're going to die. But during this terrible situation, God shows up, and he preserves Hagar, the Egyptian, and her son Ishmael from dying in the desert. Now, what does this story have to do with Joseph 4 generations later? For starters, Ishmael became a very strong leader of a people called the Ishmaelites. Now Abraham abandoned Ishmael and driving him away, and 4 generations later a caravan of Ishmaelites purchased Joseph from his brothers who betrayed him. Here's a question. Where is this caravan going with their new servant named Joseph? They're going into the homeland where their great-grandmother Hagar came as a servant for Sarah. Abraham purchased Hagar from Egypt for Sarah, and 4 generations later, Abraham's great-grandsons sold Joseph into servanthood in Egypt. As the saying goes, what goes around comes around. Joseph is a victim of Abraham's sin, and he's bearing the great-grandfather's sins to their termination 4 generations later. Joseph was the sin-bearer for Abraham, and so, according to the ancient sages, he became a suffering servant of God. Therefore, when the Messiah arrived, it was expected that he would suffer the sins of others like Joseph did for Abraham's sin. The Messiah, Yeshua, is the sin-bearer for all generations, including all in the past, all in the present, and all in the future. This reoccurrence principle is a spiritual fact of life, and it's also an integral part of the covenant that God made with Abraham. Consider this. In Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 16, and in Luke chapter 3, verse 24 to 34, we find a very interesting order of names that highlight the times from Abraham to Yeshua. The first generation mentioned is Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob, and then Joseph, and then Judah, and then David, and the 7th generation that's mentioned is the Messiah, Yeshua of Nazareth. Not only does Yeshua, the adopted son of Joseph, complete the pattern of the suffering found in Joseph's life, but by the bloodline, he is also the son of David, the son of Abraham. And this makes him the 7th watershed figure in the Messianic lineage who completes all things in himself as the Lord and as the Savior of the world. Shalom. Until next week's episode of the Nuggets of the Torah.